Support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton, an international accounting, tax, and business advisory organization dedicated to serving middle-market companies. Grant Thornton, a passion for the business of accounting. Novant Health is a not-for-profit group of hospitals and medical clinics caring for surrounding communities. Their nurses, physicians, and staff are nationally recognized for their remarkable devotion to patient care. And by Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
One of the top 5 challenges in general for us right now is disseminating what is fear and what is fact. In other words, we know that the unemployment rate is historically high. We know that foreclosures are still working themselves through the system. We know that there is a politically polarizing gridlock. We also know that 90% of those employed are mostly growing their business. Hello, we're glad that you are watching, and welcome again to the most widely watched source and dialogue on Carolina business and public policy. I'm Chris William, and this time CEO of a Statesville, North Carolina-based scientific company, Bill Shumaker from Kewuanee.
Major funding also by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation in Charlotte, enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina, who's responsible for rising healthcare costs. Join Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. This edition of Carolina Business Review was recorded October 21st, 2011. On this week's program, Dr. Robert Bliss of Wake Forest University, Jeff McKay of Northeastern Strategic Alliance, and special guest William Shumaker, President and Chief Executive Officer of Kewuanee Scientific. Now, Chris William.
Hello, welcome to our program. Jeff, welcome back. Good to have you here. Rob, welcome. Jeff, I'm going to start with you. You know, how do we separate fact from fiction? How do we know, all those things? We do know unemployment rate's high. We do know that. But how do we, I get maybe a better way, how do we not get worked up over where we are right now and try to keep a cooler head?
That's a great question, and I don't know the answer.
Do you see any sign that maybe we might be going in that direction?
A little bit. I know a lot of the companies that we've been talking with and working with in the past seem to be transitioning from a conversation that's centered around contraction and restructuring of their operation to now somewhat of a growth mode and expansion mode. So to me, that's a positive sign. But the uncertainty, I think, still drives and pushes the mindset back to the negative. And it's tough to get over that hump. You
still have a very uncertain, people feel like, business people, public policy folks still feel very uncertain about the future.
I think there is a lot of uncertainty. And when you have uncertainty, sometimes it stops things in its tracks. And I think we're all dealing with a little of that right now.
Rob?
I think certainly we have a lot of uncertainty. But we're also focusing a lot of the discussion in the wrong areas. The problem that we're facing is not the interest rates are too high. Interest rates are historically low. Banks have tons of liquidity. So the problem is not something the Fed can solve. And we need to look to government as a source of some of the problems. The banks have money to lend. Companies have money already. The reason we're not growing does not have to do with the lack of bank lending or companies crying for money. That's not the issue. I think the issue goes back to uncertainty, and it's huge, and it covers all sorts of areas like regulation and taxes and healthcare. And until those get resolved, companies are not going to have the confidence to start growing.
You know, I don't want to get too esoterical here because I know we can go down this road and not make any sense. At least I won't make any sense at all. But somebody once said, what we need is a parent in charge. You know, that would lend itself to we need some type of authoritative, trustworthy, honest broker figure in charge to say, okay, let's put some certainty back in. We know we're going to be okay, and here's why. How do we get that leadership? Is it political leadership, Jeff? Is it corporate leadership? Is it social leadership? Where does it come from? Who stands up and say, okay, follow me, raises the flag, follow me?
I think it's a combination of all of that. And I think some of it starts with ourselves is, we've got to take, I think, a positive approach in our own households to some degree, and hopefully that will transition out. But, I'm just not sure that you can pinpoint one of those areas and say that's going to be what takes us to that point.
Mm-hmm. Rob, same thing.
One would hope it would come from the top of the political leadership, but we don't have a political system that fosters that kind of discussion. So we have to look to other venues. One of the areas that could actually help in this area is the press. And if the press, instead of echoing and fostering this kind of adversarial discussion, which is not productive, on the part of the political parties and the political candidates, if they spent more time stepping back and saying, well, let's look at the thing in a more adult manner, and requiring the politicians in answering questions to act in a more adult manner rather than demonizing each other, that could contribute to a more informed discussion.
So I guess with a press that in general is becoming more and more commercialized, more and more driven as a business, for better or for worse, I guess how do you get back to that place where the press can be a place to have an honest dialogue? How do you do that? And especially now when there were networks that are clearly politicized and boldly wear that on their lapels.
That's the difficulty of our political system. One of the weaknesses of democracy and capitalism as it intersects. You have politicians who are interested in getting re-election. You have press that is interested in making money. Where are the people who are interested in solving problems?
Jeff, I want to come back to you about a current issue that's going on in South Carolina, and that is the National Labor Relations Board, or everyone calls it the NLRB, had filed suit against Boeing some time ago now, at the beginning of the summer, to contest their very bold move to the South Carolina Lowcountry to build the Dreamliner parts. And has that had, in South Carolina Chamber and Otis all have come out very aggressively against the NLRB in a very public way, and not so much whether you think that's good or bad, but has the NLRB action and has the subsequent reaction by the South Carolina Chamber of Commerce, has any of that slowed down what is going on in kind of with not just Boeing, but some of the economic development around what Boeing represents for the Lowcountry?
I haven't seen it affect us in the NISA region. I think
and NISA meaning Northeastern
Strategic Alliance. And I haven't heard any of my colleagues say it's been a real issue across the state. I think there's a concern maybe at the national level of where it's going, what's going to happen. And I'm sure there's concerns on both sides, but locally we haven't seen that to be an issue that's prevented us from doing any deals.
Does NISA or the Northeastern Strategic Alliance, that northeastern part of South Carolina, is that, in your opinion, will that benefit greatly by the Boeing deal and subsequent deals? You're
talking about the location of Boeing? Well, absolutely. I think now there's a great article in the USA Today about Boeing and the airline specifically, and they're poised now to get it in the air. And when that happens, I think you're going to see the supplier base start to ramp up, and the entire state should benefit from that. Actually, the state and the surrounding states will benefit.
Well, Rob, let's come to you and talk to you about the contest between the National Labor Relations Board and the state of South Carolina, or the South Carolina Chamber of Commerce, or labor in South Carolina in general. What does that represent? Does that represent a labor industry that is more than matured and is trying to hold on to market share? Does it represent businesses that are acutely trying to hold on and cover their labor costs? What does that represent?
The businesses are trying to do the best they can to compete. And what this action represents is a wonderful example of the kind of uncertainty and confusion that is gratuitously being introduced by the government. This was something that had not arisen before. We have a company that is one of our major exporters and is on the verge of producing this this new airliner. It's been delayed many years. And just as it's starting to come to fruition, you have the federal government kind of tossing a wrench in the works. We don't need that kind of uncertainty being introduced. The country needs to avoid those kinds of things right now.
Okay. Guys, that'll be the last word. Bring our guest on in a moment. Next week on this program, Pete Karmanos is pretty proud of the Carolina Hurricanes as well. He should be as their owner. 2006 Stanley Cup champions and has almost consistently made it to some level of the playoffs. Peter Karmanos will be here next week on this program. And then in 2 weeks from Charleston in the Low Country, Anita Zucker from Intertech Group will also be here. What is the secret to those who seem to be growing, to seem to be hiring and going about the business at hand? Well, Statesville, North Carolina-based Kewuanee Scientific is one of those smaller firms that are participating in the region's forward momentum. They are somewhat in the furniture business, and the question is the furniture business showing a rebound? Joining us now is Kewuanee Scientific President and Chief Executive Officer Bill Shumaker. Bill, welcome to the program. Nice to have you here.
Thank you, Chris.
Would you categorize Kewuanee as being in the furniture business? Or
Yes, we're in the furniture business, but not the traditional sense, not what we're setting on. We provide research laboratories around actually on an international basis.
And Bill, where are you with that growth? Because it seems like you are posting some top-line year-over-year growth. How does that go kind of in contrast to some of the things that you're reading here about?
Well, we were talking a little bit before about this, and we're closely aligned with the construction industry. So when you start looking at what's happening to the construction industry, especially when you look at universities in North and South Carolina, we're blessed to have some wonderful schools in this area. And they all have research laboratories, and they are hiring people to go into those laboratories for research. And of course, we participate in that growth pattern.
Well, I'm not going to ask you all the good questions. Go ahead, Jeff. I've got plenty, and I'll keep ticking down my list, please.
I'm just curious to know international versus domestic sales. I mean, how do you compare? What's the...
Well, the last fiscal year, about 16% of our sales came from the international side. Going forward, we would expect to probably see that increase more than what we're seeing domestically. But kind of looking out toward 2012, we see it rather flat domestically, but international seems to be regaining its strength, especially in some of the Asian markets and the Middle East.
And let me ask a quick follow-up. Is that the pure sales that you're selling into those markets you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay, so if you see it flat domestically and you see it growing internationally, is this go back to the dialogue that we've all had that the United States has not been as aggressive in some of the STEM, science, technology, engineering, math? Do you see that as, I know you're kind of far down the line there, but you are also vertically integrated there to some degree.
No, we're right in the middle of that.
Yeah.
I think that when you look at what's happening, the Middle East has a lot of money, and we're sending them a lot of it ourselves, and they're spending it on universities. We're doing some work in Saudi Arabia at King Saud University, and it's a women's college, and the school is being built from the ground up. Something like 48 buildings going up at the same time, if you can imagine that. And so they're busy educating their population from what we can see there. As far as if you look toward the Asian type markets, we're seeing more in the pharmaceuticals, the biotechs, those type of areas. India's always had a wonderful education system there. So we've seen a lot of contract research move from the United States into India for that type of projects. And fortunately, we've been able to export product to those areas.
The common story we hear is that American manufacturing is dying. Your company manufacturers in India as well as in the U.S., but you're doing a lot of exporting from the U.S. And how do you explain the disconnect between the stories about dying manufacturing and your own success?
Well, I think the markets are dynamic, and you have to be adjusting to the markets. We've invested heavily in equipment and machinery and people, and it takes all three to make things come together and work properly. You have to always increase your productivity to be competitive. And of course, as the dollar has weakened internationally, we've become a lot more competitive. So we're competing with the Europeans and the Asians all the time. And we don't mind doing that as long as we can create a level playing field where we're compared properly in what we're providing.
Do you feel like it's a level playing field? I mean, because you'll have manufacturers like Dan D'Amico from Nucor that will pound the table and say it's absolutely not a level playing field for us domestic manufacturers.
I don't think anything's ever going to be level, but we have to create an environment that what each of us can provide has unique uses for the owner. So, for example, our international group, we don't just provide products. We provide services that go along with those products. We have engineers on staff, mechanical engineers, architects on staff. We do the entire project, all the way from the design stage. And if they need someone to come in and run gas lines and waste lines, we do that on an international basis. Now, we don't do that in the United States because this market's different. But we provide that extra dimension that makes our, working with us a lot easier for the owner to say, boy, I really want you guys on this project with me.
So it's a combination of a manufacturing and a service
Yes.
business.
And the products that you have, that's right.
Okay.
I want to go back to a minute about your international growth and what you're seeing there. Is a lot of the development and growth taking place by some of your customers internationally, is that being subsidized to some degree by the government there, or is it all being privately, the growth being privately funded?
It depends on the location, obviously. For example, in Saudi Arabia, a lot of that is government-sponsored projects like King Saud University. In Riyadh, that's certainly government money going into that project. On the other hand, we just closed a major project for Reliance Industries in India, in the Mumbai area, and that's private. And they have a major research center going up over there right as we're talking, and most of those products are coming from North Carolina, even though we have a factory in India.
Do you feel that the state of the financial system is in any way constraining your growth?
I think there's lots of various constraints that's going on, and the uncertainties that we see makes all of us kind of pull back to a certain degree. It's hard to say that it's one particular thing, but we see a bundle of things that are hanging out there, and that causes issues with us in making decisions. And if we don't or aren't able to quantify what those issues are going to be, we tend to stand on the sidelines.
Like what would be the thing that you look at and say, I'm not going to add positions because of X, because your top line's not growing?
No, not necessarily. They're things that we can't control. For example, we have one person on staff that all they do is research regulation that comes our way. And what do we have to do to become in compliance with those regulations? That person really doesn't add a lot to us other than keeps us, meeting the standards of the law. The healthcare bill is a big issue with us because healthcare costs have increased dramatically in North Carolina, and we don't know right now exactly what all the nuances of this bill are going to say and what it's going to mean to us. and someone in the back room somewhere is writing up what all those are going to be. And until they're exposed and we can quantify what those are, we tend to stand on the sidelines to find out.
Sounds familiar. It's a dialogue that we had either on the show or right before the show. Jeff, question?
I'm just going back to the international side, and I'm curious to see the U.S. regulatory issues that you have to face. How here again is that compared to international? I mean,
the U.S. regulations are much more strict than what we see in, for example, in India. Now, we're extremely green company. We recycle everything down to its nth degree here, and reuse it till there's nothing left to use of it, until we've used it all up. We carried that same philosophy over to India, but we didn't have to. So, for example, we run a very clean green operation in India. It's very similar to what we have here in North Carolina. But the regulations-wise, we didn't have to do that.
Does that give you an advantage, or does that just make you feel good that you're fulfilling your social role?
Well, both. Because for one thing, when people come and visit us, they like coming in to see what we're doing. Mm-hmm. And when they see that we're trying to take care of our environment, it makes them want to do business with us. I've been into some locations, and especially into China, where there's been a river or a stream running next door, and someone would just take a bucket and throw it into the stream, and you're wondering why would they do that? And you walk outside and you see a little kid with a fishing pole, fishing in that same stream, and I wouldn't even get close to it if it were me. But I think that it's the right thing to do, and it pays off for us. Mm-hmm.
You have manufacturing operations in India and the U.S., and so you have a choice to a certain degree about where you do the manufacturing. Do you see the level of regulation in the U.S. rising to the point where your decisions might shift?
No, I don't. They'd have to become a lot.
So you can what you're seeing coming down the pike is not.
We want to know what they are, so we can deal with them. Mm-hmm. But we can't ship our products. The reason we built that factory in India was not to ship products back here. It's to serve that marketplace there for small projects that we can't service from here. And we ship a lot of air in a container, and it's very expensive to do that, going and coming. Mm-hmm. So we don't do it.
You know, Bill, which is an interesting thing, a couple of weeks ago on this program, we had a gentleman named Bruce Cochran, fifth-generation furniture manufacturer, sold the business in 1995, became a consultant in China Pacific Rim, came back to Lincoln County, and built a facility to build furniture, domestic staff, domestic crew, and to ship furniture overseas. And he said he sees that as an opportunity, and that seems to come full circle. So as you're working in India, as you see China, is it starting to shift away from those countries and maybe even going South America, or maybe even coming back domestically? Is it just as competitive now to do things domestically as it maybe was not 10 years ago?
Close, from what we can tell, with the shipping cost and all the things that are involved in shipping, and along with some other issues that come along with that. We see a shifting, but out of China, for example, for labor going to Vietnam. Mm-hmm. That's been a typical thing. Yeah. But for the most part, we're shipping from India, our location into India, into China. So we're just as competitive as long as we can fill that container and not have a lot of air in it. Yeah. That's the key.
Point well taken. We are out of time, Bill, but thank you for being on the program. And this, Kewuanee is probably quieter than you want it to be, but it's quiet and doing great things in Statesville. So thanks for sharing that with us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, good to see you. Rob, welcome. Demon Deacons, right? You guys got some traction. It's great. It makes everybody happy, at least that's part of the Deacon Club, and good to have you here, too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to see you, Jeff. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Until next week, I'm Chris William. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation in Charlotte, enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina, who's responsible for rising healthcare costs. Join Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton, an international accounting, tax, and business advisory organization dedicated to serving middle market companies. Grant Thornton, a passion for the business of accounting. Novant Health is a not-for-profit group of hospitals and medical clinics caring for surrounding communities. Their nurses, physicians, and staff are nationally recognized for their remarkable devotion to patient care. And by Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.com.